A quick announcement here. We're going to be going directly into our show without the usual chit-chat. We've been swamped with haunted honey orders and are trimming some extras in order to stay on schedule, more or less. So, without any further ado, episode 157, The Doghead Saint.
Long ago, there was a fierce giant by the name of Reprobus. It came to his mind that he would seek the greatest prince that was in the world, and him would he serve and obey. And so far he went that he came to a great king, of whom the reputation generally was that he was the greatest of the world. And when the king saw him, he received him into his service, and made him to dwell in his court. Upon a time, a minstrel sang before him a song in which he named often the devil, and the king, who was a Christian man, when he heard him name the devil, made anon the sign of the cross.
Reprobus asks what this means.
And then the king told to him, saying, "Always when I hear the devil named, I fear that he should have power over me, and I make this sign, that he grieve not nor annoy me." Then Christopher said to him, "Fearest thou the devil? Then is the devil mightier and greater than thou art?" I am then deceived, for I had supposed I had found the most mighty and greatest lord of the world. But I will go seek the devil to be my lord, and I his servant. And then he departed from this king, and hastened to seek the devil. As he went by a great desert, he saw a company of knights, of which a knight cruel and horrible came to him, and asked whither he went. And Reprobus answered, saying, "I go to seek the devil, for to be my master." And the horrible knight answered, "I am he that thou seekest."
This servant of the devil would go on to become one of the most popular saints of the Middle Ages. He's still one of the most popular saints worn as a medal, particularly by those hoping for safe travels. And this would be Saint Christopher, of course, patron not only of travelers, but also athletes, mariners, archers, and surfers. He started out not only as a servant of the devil, but as a dog-headed human. That canine aspect we'll get to shortly, but as to him serving the devil, that's only a stop on his way to sainthood. The text you heard at the top of the show was from Legenda Aurea, the Golden Legend, a collection of hagiographies written in 1260 by Jacobus de Voragine, a Dominican friar in Genoa. More precisely, we use the 1843 English translation printed by Thomas Caxton, who provided our story of Robert the Devil in the last episode. I updated a few archaic words and changed the name St. Christopher used by Caxton to Reprobus, as it's a bit confusing. He only becomes St. Christopher later in the story. With the advent of the printing press, the Golden Legend became a bestseller, and de Voragine's version of the St. Christopher legend formed the popular image we have today of the saint. Now, back to our narrative right after Reprobus has met the devil.
And as they went together by a common way, they found that there was a cross, erect and standing. And anon as the devil saw the cross, he was afeared and fled.
The giant is disappointed to see this fear in his new master, and demands to know why a cross should cause him such terror. The devil explains that it is actually Christ whom he fears, and Reprobus declares,
"I then have not found the greatest lord of the world. and I will serve thee no longer. Go thy way then, for I will go seek Christ.
Reprobus then encounters a pious hermit who
preached to him of Jesus Christ and informed him in the faith diligently.
The hermit explains that the seeker of Christ must fast and pray through the night. Reprobus finds all this confusing, so the hermit suggests an alternate plan, a way the giant might serve God at a nearby river. He says,
Because thou art high of stature and strong in thy members, thou shalt be resident by that river, and thou shalt bear over all them that wish to cross, which shall be a thing right favorable to our Lord Jesus Christ, and I hope he shall show himself to thee.
And so Reprobus builds himself a hut on the bank, and with
a great staff in his hand by which he sustained him in the water, and bore over all manner of people without ceasing.
Then, one night, he wakes from a dream in which he hears the voice of a child calling him.
He went out, but he found no man. And when he was again in his house, he heard the same voice, and he ran out and found nobody. The third time he was called and came thither, and found a child by the bank of the river, which asked him to bear him over the water.
He hoists the child to his shoulders, and taking his staff, begins to cross.
And the water of the river arose and swelled more and more, and the child was as heavy as lead. And as he went farther, the water increased and grew more, and the child more and more waxed heavy, insomuch that Christopher had great anguish, and was afeard to be drowned.
When he manages to reach the far bank, he sets the child down, declaring,
Child, thou hast put me in great peril. Thou weighest almost as I had all the world upon me. I might bear no greater burden. And the child answered, Marvel thee nothing, for thou hast not only borne all the world upon thee, but thou hast borne him that created the world upon thy shoulders.
Later texts elaborate on this, saying the weight of the child represents the weight of the world's sins borne by Christ, and artists would often place a globe in the child's hand as part of the traditional iconography. But there is more. As a sign, the child tells the giant to set his staff in the earth, which then becomes
like a palm bearing flowers, leaves, and dates,
which you'll also sometimes see in images of the saint. So that scene is where Reprobus, whose name in Latin actually means rejected or condemned, becomes Christopher, meaning Christ-bearer. The latter is in Greek, however, as the story predates the church's switch to Latin. So that's the iconic episode in the St. Christopher story, the one depicted on the medals and probably the extent of most people's knowledge. But the Golden Legend goes on to describe St. Christopher making 8,000 converts in Lycia in modern Turkey, including 2 prostitutes sent by the king to corrupt this Christian who's been bringing his unwanted gospel to his land. They, however, are converted by the saint and end up tearing down the pagan idols. Various tortures are employed in an effort to compel Christopher to sacrifice to the pagan gods, including a red-hot iron cross fastened to his head, and a chair, likewise red-hot, which, when Christopher is seated upon it,
melted like wax, and Christopher issued out without any harm or hurt.
The king then assembles 40 archers to shoot him full of arrows, the reason Christopher is the patron of archery. But when the bows are fired,
the arrows hung in the air about, nigh him, without touching.
As the king marvels over this sight,
one of the arrows returned suddenly from the air and smote him in the eye and blinded him.
Christopher assures the king,
I shall die tomorrow, but make a little clay with my blood tempered, and anoint therewith thine eye, and thou shalt receive health.
Eventually, St. Christopher is dispatched through decapitation. After that, the king's eye is treated and healed through the blood of the very martyr he had executed. And then the king himself becomes a Christian convert,
And gave the commandment that if any person blamed God or St. Christopher, he should anon be slain with the sword.
A couple last facts from the Golden Legend.
Christopher was of the lineage of the Canaanites,
And
had a terrible and fearful countenance,
his height is,
12 cubits.
which comes to about 18 feet, so rather tall. That's all fine and good, but you were promised a dog-headed saint. And for that, we'll have to work our way back in history and shift our geographic focus eastward. The only significant Western narrative in which this appears was written about 280 years before the Golden Legend, around 986, by the German poet and bishop Walter von Speyer. He composed 2 Latin hagiographies, one in prose and the other in verse, and each tells the same story. So here are some things from the German narrative that were probably borrowed into the Golden Legend. Before receiving the name Christopher, he's called Reprobus. He's from the land of Canaan. He encounters Christ in the form of a child. But rather than a grotesque giant, von Speyer presents him in that dog-headed form, and his ability to communicate before his conversion is restricted to barking. He's also descended from a race of cannibals, an evil practice which might be equated with his service to the devil in the Golden Legend. And the closest thing to that difficult river crossing, which appeared for the first time in the Golden Legend, is Reprobus enduring the watery but metaphorical turbulence of baptism.
The mind, weighing down the limbs with its own mass, struggles against the storms of the world. It is bound by the heavy chains of past errors until the cleansing waters wash away the old beast.
And he's physically made fully human through this baptism. I don't have access to Walter von Speyer's text beyond that passage and a couple other snippets, but I'm guessing de Voragine or some lost intermediate text literalized this earlier version into the river crossing moment. The same could be said for his carrying the Christ child on his shoulders, being a sort of literalization of his name. The Christ bearer of early versions simply carries Christ in his heart or carries forth Christ's gospel to the pagans. The earliest version of this monstrous dog-headed figure appeared in the Acts of Andrew and Bartholomew, a narrative pieced together from fragments of manuscripts dating from the 5th to 7th century. The stories seem to have originated in Coptic communities of Syria and Egypt, but were written in Koine Greek, the lingua franca of those regions at the time. The story is now regarded as apocryphal by the Coptic, Orthodox, and Catholic churches alike, and is fanciful in the extreme. That it's worth noting here that these sorts of apocryphal entanglements, or at least the lack of a verifiable historic core to the Christopher legend, is related to a sort of demotion of the figure in the Catholic Church. He's still considered a saint, and a popular one at that, but his feast day was dropped from the official calendar in 1969, along with over 200 other saints, as part of an effort to streamline the calendar. Christopher's dubious historicity was also given as a reason for this change in his status. The Acts of Andrew and Bartholomew begin with an introductory episode involving the exorcism of a Macedonian queen. The apostles Andrew and Bartholomew both separately encounter the risen Christ, who instructs each to bring the gospel to the town of Barbaros in Parthia, which would be somewhere in northern Iran today. Bartholomew and his disciples travel by old-fashioned ship, but Andrew and his followers take a more miraculous means of transportation, After falling asleep on the seashore, they're swallowed by a giant fish, who later regurgitates them in the harbor of Barbaros. They receive angels' wings and fly to the roof of the city's theater, where they're observed by the citizens who believe them to be the local gods. When the governor, Gallion, arrives on the scene, the people convince him that the gods have perched upon the roof because they're ready to abandon the city, and that this is the fault of the priests failing to honor them adequately. The priests form a procession, blow trumpets, and bring out the idols as proof that the gods are still present. And during this distraction, the disciples descend from the roof. But they're seen and seized by the mob and brought to Gallion for questioning. They identify themselves as disciples of Christ, and the governor demands a miracle as proof of their Lord's power. Andrew then turned to the idols and
cried with a loud voice, "Are ye gods, as this multitude thinks about you?" Loud voices from them replied unto him, saying, "We are no gods, but false things, the work of men's hands. They deceive by means of us."
Then Andrew caused them to fly to the roof of the theater.
And Andrew said unto the multitude, If they were gods, and if they had a power, and hearkened to their priests, they would return and remain in their places.
Priests begged the idols to return,
but they moved not from their places. And the devils who dwelt in them spake by their mouths, O people of the city, if ye lay not hold of these men and burn their bodies with fire, we will go out from this city.
The people immediately begin stoning the Christians, bind them in chains, and drag them to the place of execution. A fire is made under them, but they're whisked away from the flames by an angel. They're captured again, and at the governor's orders, the executioners
fastened them to a wooden wheel and turned it round upon them. And they brought the large saw that they might saw them asunder. And while they were busy sawing, their hands were withered, and they could not move them.
They try again to bind them to the wheel, but
when the servants of the king wanted to take hold of the ropes, their bodies were dislocated, and their hands were cut off from their elbows and fell upon the ground.
Finally, they just give up and offer to pay the disciples to leave. But the Christians scorn this offer.
And the multitude were angered and drove the disciples outside of the city. And they pelted them with stones and left them thrown down like dead men.
Eventually, they regain consciousness and head out from the city walls to rest in the desert. But as they sleep, an
angel of the Lord lifted them up and brought them to the city, whose people were cannibals, and left them beneath a rock of the mountain, and departed from them.
The angel also appears to one of the residents of Cannibal City, who is out searching for human prey in the desert. This is the dog-headed Proto-Christopher. In this translation of the text, the term dog's head is used as his name from the Greek kinokephalos, usually pronounced cynocephalus in English, or cynocephali, or cynocephaly as the plural. Anyway, the angel says to dog's head,
O thou man whose face is like the face of a dog, lo, thou shalt find 2 men and 2 disciples with them, and they are sitting beneath this rock. And when thou shalt have reached them, let nothing unpleasant from thee come to them, for they are servants of God, lest their God be wroth, and with thee cut thee in twain.
Dog's head demands to know more of this God and to see proof that he is real.
And straightway fire came down from heaven and surrounded the dog's head, and he could not get out of it. And he stood in the midst of it, escape being impossible, and he feared greatly. And he cried with a loud voice, saying, O thou God, whom I have known, Save me from this affliction in which I am, and I will believe in thee.
When the angel demands the dog's head obey and follow the disciples wherever they may lead, he replies,
Oh, my Lord, I am not like most men, for my appearance is not like the appearance of most people, and I know not their speech. And if I were to walk with them, what could they do about my food? And if I were hungry, where should I find men to eat? I should turn round upon them and eat them.
The angel pulls him from the fire and removes from him his wild, cannibalistic nature. He also gives him the ability to communicate in the language of the Christians. He directs Dog's Head toward the disciples and departs. In the shade of the rock, Andrew, Bartholomew, Rufus, and Alexander see for the first time their new follower, whom the text then describes at length. 6 Egyptian cubits, by the way, is about 7 feet.
His appearance was fearful exceedingly. His height was 4 cubits. His face was like the face of a large dog, and his eyes like lamps of burning fire, and his back teeth like tusks of the wild boar, and his front teeth like the teeth of a lion, and the nails of his feet like a curved scythe, and the nails of his hands like the claws of a lion, and his whole appearance frightful, terrifying.
Andrew and Bartholomew flee, but as Dog's Head grasps the hands of the lesser disciples, their fear of him is divinely removed, and they accompany him to find their teachers, whom Dog's Head addresses.
Fear not my appearance, O servants of the Most High God. Your God hath sent me to you, that I may go with you to every place that you desire, and I will obey you in whatsoever ye command me. And the disciples marveled at Dog's Head.
Andrew asks his name, which he says is
Bewitched.
The apostle renames him Christian. With their new comrade in tow, the apostles are now ready to return to Barbaros, but painfully aware of his appearance, Dog's Head, Christian that is, requests,
Cover up my face before I go into the city, lest the people see me and hide from me. And they covered his face.
As they made their way to the city, Satan warns the governor to barricade the gates. But this presents no obstacle as Andrew calls on God to throw them open. Upon entry, the Christians are seized by the mob and, at the governor's command, thrown to beasts of prey.
7 lions and 3 lion whelps, and a lioness which was bringing forth young, and 2 tigers.
Dog's Head, which he's still called in the text despite the name change, then prays to God to restore his original ferocity.
And straightway he returned to his original nature, which was in him, and he was filled with wrath and rage, and he uncovered his face and looked upon the crowd with great anger. And he sprang upon all the lions that were amongst the multitude, and began to slay them, and tore their hides, and ate their flesh. And when the people of the city saw this, they trembled greatly, and were disturbed, and fled, and sought to get out of the city.
603 citizens are trampled in their panic to flee, but the Lord sends down an encircling wall of fire, making it impossible to leave Barbaros. The fearful mob becomes penitent and compliant, so the apostles take pity and ask God to quell the fire. But there's a bit more housekeeping to take care of. Bartholomew requests that the governor order the people to bring out any idols they keep in their homes. The people quickly pile all the idols before them, and the apostles ask God to open the earth and swallow them down to hell, which he does. Finally, a mass baptism is in order. This is to take place in the center of town by the amphitheater, but
The governor and the multitude entreated the disciples and said, "Oh, our lords, Forgive us, for we cannot reach that place for fear of Dog's Head, lest he should eat us as he ate the wild beasts.
Recall that Dog's Head is still activated in battle mode, so to speak, but through the rite of baptism, he's restored to the docile humanity he'd been granted earlier. Battle mode off. Now, just one more thing is needed for the mass baptism, and Andrew resolves this.
There was a pillar in the midst of the city beside the theater, and when they reached it, Andrew arose and smote it with his foot. And straightway the pillar was opened, and sweet water gushed from it. And the disciples stood in the midst of the water and baptized the multitude in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost.
All's well that ends well, except there were those 603 citizens trampled to death fleeing Dog's Head. Pained by his part in this, Dog's Head prays that they be restored to life, and
a loud voice called from heaven, "At length it shall come unto the beloved Dog's Head, that I shall give unto him the gift of giving them life. For they died through fear of thee, and by thy hand shall their life come."
if you notice that Acts at Andrew and Bartholomew doesn't much resemble von Speier's 10th century version, it's probably because he used another source, namely the martyrdom of Christophoros, a Greek hagiography composed during the 5th and 7th centuries. In it, the name Reprobus first appears. He's, again, a member of a cannibalistic race and dog-headed, though it's not clear whether all his cannibal kin have canine heads. The ferocity of Reprobus is portrayed as exceptional. He's a soldier in this version who fights against the Romans. When his army is conquered, he's taken prisoner and forced to serve in the Roman army thanks to his strength and fearsomeness. Though monstrous in appearance, Reprobus in the Greek tale is already a Christian at the start of the tale and naturally has set aside his cannibalistic tendencies. After his capture, there's another upgrade. God gives him the ability to speak the language of the soldiers, which would have been Greek as they're Byzantine Romans. Later, Reprobus interferes with those persecuting Christians and is reported to the emperor. As he awaits the consequences of this, he sits down to pray in front of a church, planting his staff in the ground next to him. Like the staff in the golden legend, it erupts in bloom, signifying that God is with him. The soldiers arrive to bring him to the emperor, and he does not resist. But when they mention being low on rations, Reprobus, through the mediation of the angel Raphael, miraculously produces loaves of bread for them. Now eager to embrace the faith, the soldiers travel with the giant to the church in Antioch where they are all baptized, and that's when Reprobus receives the name Christophoros. After this, Christophoros requests that the soldiers bind him as if he were a prisoner, and they travel to the palace of Emperor Decius. Initially intimidated by his appearance, Decius demands that Christophoros sacrifice to the pagan gods, which he naturally refuses. As a result, he endures an array of tortures, being hung by his hair, slashed with swords, and burned with oil lamps, all to no avail. Decius then switches from stick to carrot, sending two prostitutes to Christophoros' cell, hoping they will sway him, but instead, he converts them. The furious emperor then demands that the women renounce Christ and sacrifice to idols. One refuses and is hung by her hair with millstones tied to her feet, and she dies, but the other agrees to sacrifice. But that's a ruse. When she enters the temple, she mocks and topples the idols, so she experiences her own martyrdom through impalement. Inspired by Christophoros, more soldiers become followers of Christ and are burnt in a furnace. The saint is then tied to a bronze bench, and wood is stacked around him and set ablaze. From within the pyre, he prophesies a terrible fate for Decius. He's then weighted with millstones and thrown down a well, but again survives. Finally, Christophoros tells the soldier his hour of martyrdom has come and begs to be beheaded. And his soul leaves for heaven. And after the execution, Decius is beset by a horrible disease which dissolves his skin, as foretold by the saint. The oldest representation of St. Christopher in art was created around the same time as our Greek martyrdom text, that is, between the 6th and 7th century. It's a terracotta relief from Vinica in North Macedonia depicting a dog-headed soldier posed alongside St. George. They both hold spears and stand atop a slain dragon. While rarely represented with St. George, St. Christopher is usually depicted as a soldier in Orthodox art and consistently in earlier centuries with a canine head. While most of these dog-headed images are now in museums, you can still find them in churches. In Greece, 18th century frescoes of the cynocephalus are to be seen in the church of the Dormition in the city of Lindos, and 2 frescoes from the 16th and 18th century depict the dog-headed saint in the monastery of Great Lavra on Mount Athos, and 1 from the late 18th century is found in the church of the Commanders of the Heavenly Host in the town of Pelion. There are also several in monasteries and churches of Russia, including a strange fresco in the town of Sviazk in the Assumption Cathedral, which seems to substitute a horse's head for that of a dog, or else it's a very poorly rendered dog. Peter the Great, in his efforts to modernize and westernize the Russian Church, called together the Holy Synod of 1721, which switched the calendar from Julian to Gregorian, banned or taxed beards, and suppressed dog-headed images of St. Christopher. Though this more in theory than in practice, in particular, the sect known as the Old Believers has continued to produce St. Christopher icons in this style to the present day. The Greek Church never officially banned this depiction of the saint, though it's understood largely as a historical curiosity. And I should mention 2 more dog-headed figures appearing in a 10th century Life of St. Mercurius, another soldier saint, sometimes called
the father of 2 swords,
because St. Michael is said to have equipped him with the second divine sword with which to fight. An episode in this hagiography says that while out hunting,
2 cynocephali devoured the grandfather of Saint Mercurius and were preparing to eat his father when an angel appeared and surrounded them with a ring of fire.
Later, these 2 characters become fierce and loyal bodyguards of Saint Mercurius and are sometimes depicted alongside him in Coptic iconography. Already in the 10th century, there were efforts to demystify this representation of Christopher as a cynocephalus in the Synaxarion of Constantinople, which is something like an Orthodox golden legend that is a comprehensive collection of saint stories arranged by their day. It's emphasized that the figure's monstrous canine qualities are to be understood merely as symbolic of his cruel and brutish nature before his redemption. In the West, of course, these qualities were embodied by representing him as a fierce and ugly giant. You will also see pseudo-scholarly theories attributing his canine appearance to a verbal misunderstanding, a confusion between the Latin canis for dog and the figure's identity as a Canaanite. But this patronizing bit of nonsense disregards the 5 centuries of Greek texts that predate the Latin version, and in these earlier texts he is consistently described as dog-headed. And the earliest attested association with Canaan only dates to von Speier's 10th century text. The Greek martyrdom places the story in northern Turkey, so hardly near Canaan in the southern Levant. So, as we're coming to the end of this show, some sort of explanation for this bizarre depiction is probably due. The comments in the 10th century Synaxarion go a long way toward explaining things, I think. Part of it is certainly the drama offered in the transformation from ferocious monster to pious Christian, but it's more than the figure's ferocity, it's also his foreignness. A clue to this is provided by illuminations depicting cynocephaly in quite a few Armenian manuscripts of the 13th and 14th centuries. These are intended to illustrate the Feast of Pentecost. Described in the book of Acts, this was a large gathering in Jerusalem shortly after the resurrection and descent of Jesus, at which those present are suddenly and miraculously able to speak and understand languages not known to them. The biblical description is emphatic in describing more than a dozen nations or languages represented in the crowd, and the scene is often characterized as the birthday of the church, that is, the beginning of the apostles' mission to carry the gospel throughout the world. So, the significance of cynocephaly in these illustrations would be to represent the furthermost reaches of the earth, inhabited by those utterly unlike ourselves. Humans with heads of dogs have often been used in this way. Descriptions of unexplored lands populated by cynocephaly go all the way back to the Greek writer Herodotus, who, around 425 BC, cited a traveler's tale describing an eastern region of Libya populated by cynocephaly, along with headless men who have eyes in their chests. In the 13th century, Marco Polo, in his travels, cited another such tale about an island south of Burma where there lived dog-headed men with faces he describes as being
just like big mastiff dogs.
And in the 14th century, that ultimate compendium of fanciful far-off lands and improbable beings, the Voyage and Travels of Sir John Mandeville, described a location, probably the Nicobar Islands located in the Indian Ocean, populated by a race who
have hounds' heads. They are reasonable, and they worship an ox for their god.
Sounds reasonable. And I could go on. There are countless other examples, but it's time to wrap up. If you'll recall, toward the beginning of the show, I mentioned that St. Christopher had been embraced as the patron saint of surfing, presumably thanks to his dealing with that raging river. It's not an official patronage, but St. Christopher medallions became a popular protective charm, or at least a tribal signifier, among Southern California surfers in the early 1960s. So I thought it would be nice to close out the show with a bit of surf music. It is summer, after all. Now, not just any surf music, of course. This comes from a band called the Malibooz, spelled M-A-L-I-B-O-O-Z, in case you're interested. They were formed in 1965 in what the band humorously referred to as the surf mecca of New York City. However, the group's co-founder, John Sambetti, did eventually relocate to his spiritual home in Malibu, and I mean that in the most literal and old-fashioned way possible. He's a member in the parish of Our Lady of Malibu, and in 1999 he managed to combine his devotion to surf guitar and Catholicism in the Malibu's album Living Waters, The Surfer's Mass, which I'll link to in the website notes. It's a genuine Holy Mass, just with the liturgical chants rendered in the surf idiom. And so we'll close out with his rendition of the Kyrie eleison.